the technocracy that might have been put in place in this country as far back as FDR, but has certainly gained lots of power over the years, especially the last year. And the technocracy is, this group of so-called experts, these powerful elite that would then govern, which is something a lot of people still talk about today, installing like a CEO government, a CEO in charge rather than a president. And even though Smedley blew that whistle, nothing really happened. I believe he testified about it too. Nothing happened, and there were some closed-door meetings between FDR and the corporations, and that was it. And then they ended up making a lot of money over the next decade, plus that FDR was in power because World War II happened, and a lot of these places, I believe DuPont was involved, and DuPont is responsible for, I think, making all the gunpowder for every American war from the beginning. Extremely powerful corporation. I tend to believe that something else happened that we don't know about with the business plot, and that possibly those corporations did access the presidency and did maintain power in the very same way that we saw Biden being controlled by who knows, corporations, other people, demons, I don't know. These people pumping out robot clones. Clearly something was up there too. And Biden, to me, is like an echo of Woodrow Wilson and FDR. Not just because they're two incapacitated, half-dead people, but because they allowed the country to sink further into the hellhole that we are today. But then you fast forward some, and we talk about JFK and what happened with him, his assassination, and another giant, dangerous piece of theater that the Joint Chiefs of Staff went to JFK and proposed. I'm sure a lot of you know this one. I talk about it a lot. But it's interesting in this context of these elites trying to do insane things to the American people for power and control. Not a conspiracy theory. This is declassified stuff. They went to JFK and said, with the Operation Northwoods plan, this was General Lemnitzer, who was part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, went to JFK and said, hey, what do you think? Me and the boys have been brainstorming. What do you think if we just do a ton of false flags on American people? We could bomb planes. We could do mass shootings for the sole purpose of blaming it on Cuba and starting that war, because they love war. They want war all the time. And just real quick, to go back to Smedley Butler, he would end up writing a book called War is a Racket. And this is a decorated war hero who eventually realized that wars were mostly happening to protect corporations in America. And, we haven't even officially declared war since the 40s. And we've been in war my whole life. So, this is not a new idea. And Lemnitzer proposed a very similar thing to JFK. JFK fired him. And I think it was within a year that JFK lost his life. I think a lot of people were involved, and the CIA was probably a part of it. We could talk, we've talked to people who were in the mafia. They believe the mafia was involved. I tend to think all these people, we talk about Mossad, we could talk about the mafia, we talk about the CIA. I think everyone had a hand in that. And they create this illusion of the patsy, of Lee Harvey Oswald. And if you were tuning in last night, you saw how weird, I'm sure you've seen the Dealey Plaza video, and they tried telling us he was shot from the back, but clearly JFK took a bullet from the front. That was a real plan that people in power really wanted to do. And that's just one of many. There have been, sometimes people also, I want to say, sometimes people hear false flag and think that's a totally fake thing. But false flag does mean people die. People lose their lives, but it's blamed on something else, right? So when people say, oh, it's a false flag, people are like, well, it's not all fake. People did die. But that's the point. They're not above taking innocent lives to promote some insane war, to go to war. And Lemnitzer was directly a part of that and fired. And it's also worth noting that he went to work for NATO. I think he ran NATO soon after that. That was his next job. And early on, around that same time, this is late 60s, early 70s, when he was with NATO, is when the years of lead started happening in Italy, which was nonstop, at least a decade of false flags between political rivals, where they were doing a lot of the same things, very similar things that Lemnitzer was talking about with Northwoods. I don't think planes so much, but there were kidnappings of political figures. There were assassinations, bombs. It was really ugly. And a lot of theories point to NATO being involved with it. Now, Lemnitzer wasn't a part of NATO throughout the entirety of Years of Lead in Italy, but he was certainly there in the beginning. And I think it's impossible to overlook that connection. So again, just to point this back to everything we've been talking about with, you know, the technocrats, these people in power willing to do anything. This is nothing new. So I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility to think about people surrounding this administration. We're willing to think about it for the Biden administration. I think a lot of the same people are involved and surrounded this administration, and it's worth considering. And you would think Lemnitzer would be just expelled from government after all that, but he wasn't. He was then brought back to be on the Rockefeller Commission, which investigated CIA crimes against the American people. That's insane to me. And then in 1949, so not end then, but flashback a little bit. In 1949, this is just worth noting, the CIA made an agreement with the DOJ that the CIA could investigate itself for crimes. And I think that's still in effect. So that should just be alarming to everybody. So I just want everyone to keep those things in mind. This theater, this violent theater that happens in our politics, not just here, it's around the world. These depraved people who seek power at all costs, that ingratiate themselves into administrations. I'm not saying Elon is that, but I think there's a lot of people within the Silicon Valley world that are a part of this. You might have heard me talk about the OpenAI whistleblower recently, who was found dead. You know, he was blowing the whistle on what he thought was illegal, reprehensible things that OpenAI was doing. And that was like just a few months before Project Stargate happened, which is the $500 billion fund that Trump started for OpenAI and some others like Oracle and NVIDIA and stuff like that. But like this whistleblower was found dead in his apartment, and they said it was a suicide. And his family is totally confident that it was not that. I mean, there's photos online you can go up and look that are, you know, they're gross, but there's blood all over the place. And there's this weird part of a wig and possibly an earpiece. And also the cameras that he had around his house all stopped working before the death, we'll say. But there's clearly something happening. And, you know, we just went over the Palantir story, and they're, you know, they've denied it. The New York Times is a lying cesspool of snakes. But they reported on Palantir saying that Palantir and Trump are going to have a database created for interagency database to collect on the American people, which doesn't sound good. And whether or not that story is true, the Palantir has a very long history with the CIA. They were funded by the CIA's venture capitalist firm, In-Q-Tel. Peter Thiel went on to do a lot of funding of Facebook. He's got his hands on a lot of weird things. We don't have to go through all of them again, but you know, we'll bring up ambrosia, the injecting young men's blood into your body to try to live longer. He also has a menstrual cycle tracking app, which is, I think, bizarre. A lot of war defense stuff, Andrew. So there's a lot of major power and major money at stake here. And Palantir and Elon, you know, go hand in hand. That's PayPal Mafia. There's something certainly happening, and I'm kind of obviously we should all keep an eye on this story, because I don't know where it's going to go, but now it's bleeding into the contracts. Now it's bleeding into the defense spy satellite stuff. Now it's bleeding into NASA and how we get to the International Space Station, because Elon is saying he's going to decommission that rocket that does that. After just saving those astronauts, you know, just recently, a few months ago. So I'll leave it there for now.